Hi, my name is Eva Steiner and this is my project Psychotherapists Around the Globe. I am interviewing the psychotherapists around the world and asking them the same 8 questions. I am wondering how mental health profession is in their country. Today we are going to Thank you for doing this interview with me. Before we start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, first of all, Eva, thank you so much for inviting me and kind of making it possible to contribute to this fantastic project. I am just excited, and I've been following your work, and it kind of inspired me also to think about psychotherapy in my own context. So thank you again. My name is Armina and I'm a family systemic therapist. I work in Sarajevo and I am based in Bosnia and Herzegovina. My work really contains while working with families and couples. Children also are welcomed in our sessions. And every day in my clinical practice, I'm privileged to learn a little bit, not just about myself, but also about the families in my country.
Tell me a little bit about your culture. What is some holiday or tradition that your country celebrates? And if your culture would be an emotion, what emotion would it be?
I love that question. Just going to the holidays, we have many holidays in our country because we have 3 official religions here. So each religion gets their own religious holidays, but we also have holidays that are kind of a legacy of socialistic culture that we've been living in 30, 40 years ago, where we were part of ex-Yugoslavia. And actually yesterday was the 1st of May, which is traditionally celebrated as a Labor Day. So it's a fun day because it's a day for people to get together, to maybe do a bit of barbecue, to do a bit of talking, to meet with some friends, but most of all to try to use wonderful nature that we have in Bosnia. So the tradition that is related or attached to the 1st of May is that we would go somewhere where we have a lot of woods or meadows and just enjoy the nature and pause for a second while hopefully eating and drinking nicely. And when it comes to the emotion of my country, I think that this is the question that I was really looking forward to because I thought it was very profound how we can relate to the emotions that we have while thinking about the communities. I think when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina, the feeling would definitely have to be Sevdah, which is also a part of our traditional folk music. And the origin of that word comes from the Turkish language, and it's kind of rooted in the word sevda, which means love, but mostly unreturned love and longing for love. And it's sevda is attached to this melancholy. I've read recently that Balkans are such a sad place. And when I think about sevda, every time when I hear it played or when I'm with my friends or in the community, it's always kind of invitation for this self-reflection through melancholy. And it's always an invitation for people to think about themselves, but also the relationships and how they could have been different.
How did you become a psychotherapist in your country and what is your psychotherapeutic approach?
So I'm working as a systemic family therapist, and my path to education started 10 years after I graduated from university. I'm originally trained as a psychologist, and then I worked in a different area altogether. So when I had my own children, I started questioning maybe some of the new realities that I was exposed to. And somehow psychotherapy as such became a prominent place for me and for thinking about the world and maybe being curious about the world through the psychotherapy lenses. I landed in systemic psychotherapy by pure accident. I didn't really know much about it when I started to join the course. But the more that I learned about it, the more it made sense to me. And I remember that it was a 4-year training. And I remember that kind of gave me an opportunity that through my own learning process in discovering systemic concepts, families, communities, I also gradually discovered about myself, my relationship with my partner, positioning with our kids. And it kind of influenced me to be more curious about how psychotherapy and change of perspective can actually influence the quality of your life. But it can also invite you to have maybe difficult conversations or to have different perspectives when understanding things that are happening in your family. So it really gave me personally a lot of satisfaction.
So how did you end up in systemic therapy by coincidence?
I saw an announcement and I said, oh, family therapy. This is something that could maybe work for me because now I have my own family. So really, I never really thought of that much, which is... But just trust the process and see where we go. So maybe that also helped me to become in love over the time, because I haven't had any ideas of how this systemic therapy field needs to look. So the more I kind of explored and the more I learned, it allowed me more flexibility in my learning as well.
And in general in Bosnia, how can you become a psychotherapist? Do you need psychology or can you go directly to the psychotherapeutic approach?
No, you don't. You don't have to be a psychologist, but you do need to have a university degree. So it's either you're a psychologist or a pedagogue or a social worker, or you can be a medical doctor, psychiatrist. So these are kind of the main professions that are allowed to enter into the training. And we also have a union of psychotherapeutic organizations who are trying to set up certain rules and guidelines for the training institutes as well. And they're very much aligned with the European Association for Psychotherapy. So whatever is approved and whatever is kind of directed or guided and established by the European associations, we are trying to be in line with that. We have few therapeutic approaches in Bosnia, not so many. We are hoping that maybe as we develop as a field, more training institutes and more psychotherapeutic approaches are going to become available to people. But they're still very much linked to kind of the basic education degree, and then following from that, you can have an additional training that lasts from 4 to 5 years, depending on the approach.
Mm-hmm. Do you maybe know which approaches do you have?
I do. So we have Gestalt and we have integrative child and adolescent therapy. We also have transactional therapy. We have some existential therapists, family systemic therapy. EMDR actually is a part also of that, group analysis. And we also have cognitive behavioral therapy. And now I know that some colleagues are in training for play therapy and few others. So hopefully, as they graduate and as they finish with their education, maybe additional schools will open.
How society looks upon psychotherapy or any psychological help?
In the past, it was linked very much with this medical approach that is quite linear, where kind of people are invited to be observed through different diagnoses. But that approach is not very supportive or inviting for people who would like to change something, because nobody wants to be labeled, nobody wants to be judged, and definitely nobody wants to walk around with a diagnosis. So I think that we are changing that approach through psychotherapy and trying to make a distinction between psychiatry, psychotherapy, and psychology, which takes a lot of work of our colleagues and myself in order to educate the general public. And I think the more that we also are exposed to this area of education, and the more that we are available to provide some sort of guidelines to people, the less the stigma that is attached to mental health in general is being present. And a lot of work has been done, particularly in the past 10 years. And I think that a lot of my colleagues who are either psychotherapists or psychologists are now being also vulnerable to talk to medias, to be out there, to provide some sort of answers to the general public, aiming to foster the dialogue around mental health. And I think this is truly a key component, that we are also available as it is a general public. It's a two-side conversation. We cannot expect people to reach out to psychotherapy if they have all these ideas about the psychotherapy that are coming from us. So we also need to be more approachable and to be there to provide answers, if we can.
Do you maybe know what is a mental health stigma from the past?
I think it was very much attached to just like before the war, it was very much still the mental health was kind of contained, I would say, to the area of psychiatry. And of course, the psychiatry has its very important role and place to play in mental health in general. But then, because in the Balkans there were wars, and in particular in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that kind of shifted a little bit perspective of how we can reach out But still, some of the people that have been exposed to different experiences, very difficult experiences, were in the position to be attached to the diagnosis. And I don't think that necessarily encouraged more people to reach out and to go and to seek psychotherapy, because it somehow, I have a feeling, it left them alone and isolated in that as well. For example, I have an experience of working with war veterans, men in particular. And one of the challenges they face is that people would be labeling them behind the post-traumatic stress disorder. And then there would be a tendency for them to be alone in that, in holding that space and carrying that. While at the same time, the experience that they shared or that they are living through even today is affecting their relationships at the job or family or community. So if we were to invite all of these members who are kind of also sharing a space with a person who is being challenged in any way, then maybe we can also see how we can all contribute to that rather than kind of just isolating it on one person. So I think maybe that also kind of could help to destigmatize the approach of psychotherapy, because it shouldn't be just me going through that by myself. I should be supported, and I should also support others.
And how is mental health help available? Through public system, through private system, or both?
Both. So we have certain structures that are established through the local medical centers, and there are centers for mental health that are called. And there you can get an assistance if you want, free of charge within your medical insurance. But also, there is a lot of emerging colleagues who are opening their own private practices, and either through the NGO or private practice. So there are options now, I think, available for families and individuals who are seeking support.
Mm-hmm. And can you work in a public system if you are a psychotherapist but not psychologist, for example?
Yes and no, because one of the things that the Bosnia and Herzegovina is still missing is the law on psychotherapy. So if there would be a kind of a law on psychotherapy, then it would regulate this particular area even further. I know that the Association for Psychotherapy, Union for Associations, is currently in the process of initiating this dialogue with the general public, and they already established a working group to work on the establishment of the law. So that should definitely help. But unofficially, it is seen very agreeably, I would say, and if you have completed any psychotherapy approach. So people are also kind of including that for the one that like in their own signatures as well. So even though there is a lack of law, I think that there's a general recognition that the colleagues have put their time and efforts into 4 to 5 years training, and this is seen as something that is important and that is adding to their skill base.
So there is no law for psychotherapy. Is there law for psychology?
That's a great question. Currently, the colleagues that are in psychology are trying. They just passed the first, I think, draft of the law in the assembly, and it took some time. So now I think that also inspired psychotherapy to say, now there's something going on in this particular field of regulation. So maybe now we can do that as well, or at least try to have those conversations. So hopefully in the next few months, this will be established as well for the colleagues in one part of the country.
What is your society teaching about child-parent relationship, and whether this value of society also influence how you design your interventions as a therapist?
I think absolutely. When we talk about discourses that particular Bosnian society is exposed to, this definitely influences not just the parent-children relationships, but also how the therapists are thinking about helping families in need. When it comes to my particular work, I'm very much influenced by the postmodernistic ideas of the discourses that are being formed and established and maintained, not just in the meaning making, but also in the ideas that are coming from society. And one of the additional values that are inspiring me are also feministic values. So very much into equality and reconsidering patriarchy, I would imagine, and the balances of power in every way. And from my experience, it has helped very much families to have this approach in their everyday interactions, but also thinking how they see themselves. But this is linked with the way how I perceive my position in the therapeutic space, which is non-expert, and trying to be more in touch with the families are trying to change for themselves, having in mind that they are the experts of their own life, not myself. So I think just by changing the way how we interact, not just parents interacting with children, but also us, because we do have a certain parental position in the work with our families and communities. But if we allow ourselves and if we invite to leave the expertise behind and be curious about what can be helpful to parents and children and families, then maybe we will be reminded and we will remind our families that they do have the strength, that they do have skills, and that they will be able to create their own changes that is working for them specifically. So I think that this then in return could influence also the relationship that I have with their children, because there's a power dynamic sometimes between children and parents.
And can you tell me more about this parental position?
Some of the families that we work with, particularly when the kids get into the adolescence or from different reasons, tend to lose the idea that they are the parents, and sometimes the kid can take over. So one of the ideas that is coming from family therapy is also that we need to re-examine the authority and the voices of every member of the system, because sometimes, particularly when there is an issue or a problem or a crisis, some voices tend to have more space than others. And in order for family to function, and in particular to develop and to create space for every single member, the voices, the space for discussions need to be available to every member, not just a few. And sometimes when we have a problem, that the whole narrative of the family becomes caught up in this idea that there's just problem-saturated stories. Sometimes they forget that there was other way of being, that there was other way of working with problems, that there was the other way of thinking about themselves, and also allowing themselves sometimes maybe a chance to just to become different persons.
And how prevalent is patriarchy in your society?
I would say very much, and we can see it in different areas of our life. We have had a rise of femicide a lot, so there was a lot of gender-based violence targeting women. We can see it still very much in the expectations that are placed on both men and women in our society. And it's also, I think, linked to the earlier point that we had, which is in most of the cases, sometimes women will be asking and reaching out for help, while men would be seen maybe as weak if they reach out for psychotherapy. So you can see kind of patriarchy ideas that are surrounding patriarchy about how it is to be a man or a woman or a child, and how it is to live in the society are kind of seen in every aspect of our life. So this is also something that psychotherapy can help provide different ways of being. I think one of the ideas that is quite influential in my work as well is narrative therapy, of course, but also the work of Vicky Reynolds and the idea that we as a therapists also have responsibility and opportunity to influence how the society is perceived and how we are perceived in society. So there's also this part of activism, I think, in psychotherapy that we haven't thought of before, which is quite relevant for the society that I live in.
What are the learned beliefs regarding client-therapist relationship, and can the relationship continue outside the therapy once the therapy process is over?
That is a very important ethical question. It's, I think, one of the ways how we can assist our clients and families that we work with is if we try to be, I wouldn't say neutral, but if we try to follow their own strengths and their own positions and their own meaning making. And I think the idea that we need to be very careful about the relationship that we form and that we maintain, the relationship that should be very aware of the power dynamics that we have. And my concern might be if we were to continue the relationship beyond the therapy room, that there might be some ethical considerations around the power dynamics that have been established within the therapy room, because it is a very vulnerable place for the families and the people that we work with. And there's a lot of privilege and trust that we hold in that particular space. So I think that might be one concern that I might have. The other concern is that Bosnia is quite a small community. So it happens sometimes that we do work with the clients that we either know or that maybe are somehow close to us throughout some friends or some people that used to work with us. And I think that it always needs to be a very careful consideration when we are faced in that situation, just because we do need to have in mind our position in that process, and we don't want to be ever question that we are abusing our power or that we are abusing the trust that has been given to us. I think one of the ways how we might be able to do that is if we don't work in isolation, if we have a team of colleagues that we can consult with, if we also have a clear ethical guidelines. As far as I know, through the European Association guidelines for psychotherapy, it is clearly said that there should not be any kind of relationship that goes beyond the therapeutic room that could be potentially seen as used for the therapist's benefit, either personal or professional gain. And I think that it also, because there is a kind of this power dynamic that we need to be aware of, if we want to be helpful to families and our clients, then we also need to be quite aware of our responsibility in that process.
And in case of therapeutic abuse, can a client turn to some chamber or entity?
Particularly in Bosnia, so there is this Union of Association of Psychotherapists, and I know that the union so far received few complaints about the unethical practices of some colleagues who have been portraying themselves as psychotherapists. Again, if there would be a law and if there would be kind of understood definition about who psychotherapist is, what psychotherapist is in the frame of his or her work, what are ethical constraints, then I think it might be easier. Currently, the Union of Psychotherapeutic Association is trying to regulate that, but they don't have any legal authority. I think the authority that they hold is professional, and it's credibility to be attached with the union rather than it holds legal consequences.
Is supervision a must for a therapist in your country?
Supervision is definitely a must when it comes to family systemic therapy therapist in training, and in particular live supervision. And this is a part of their training that I can only speak on behalf of my own approach. And the colleagues that are usually doing live supervision is that they are working with families while they have another therapist team in the other room, and they're watching it through the screen. And on one side, so you have a therapist and a family. On the other side, you have a therapeutic team and a supervisor, and they're all working together for the benefit of the family. It's a part of the kind of the process of developing systemic thinking, trying to create ideas and hold spaces for all voices, which sometimes can be challenging. So I think without this particular component of the training, it is very challenging to become a systemic family therapist. On the other hand, the colleagues are encouraged and asked to do a certain number of the supervision themselves, but there are different ways how they can do it. They can do it through the group supervision. They can do it for individual supervision when they have clients. They're encouraged earlier to try and form intervision groups so that they can have a peer reflection as well. So there is a lot of questioning and there's a lot of kind of broadening perspective for them to become family systemic therapists. It's quite, I would say, ambitious task to go through this training. Yeah.
Oh, I can imagine. But it sounds also really valuable, to basically be a therapist, provide a therapy, and somebody observe you on the spot and then give you feedback, because it's also seeing the emotions, the atmosphere in the room is not just through transcript.
Yes, as you said, exactly. The wealth of so many processes that are unraveling in the room, either therapeutic room or the team that is behind the screen is amazing. It's such a wealth of ideas that come and inspirations, and the ideas that are continuously opening through the reflections of other colleagues. So that is quite impressive. When it comes to kind of our work with, and I think this is one of the questions that you earlier asked about, how do we contribute to reduce stigma that is attached to mental health? I think one of the ways is also to be useful or to be seen as a useful members of the communities that we work with. So for this particular training of family systemic therapists, there was an agreement that was made with Centers for Social Work. So all the families that are usually being on the margins of the society are now referred to the institute, and all these family therapists that are in training and the supervisors are working with them. And it's completely free of charge for the families that are struggling with some very important, I would say, existential and life questions are referred, and also the local community is reacting well to that as well. So I mean, that maybe this is also, we are being approachable and we're being,
and also working together. Yeah. What are the most common complaints that the client comes to therapy for?
We work with so many different families. So it ranges from the most typical, maybe, period when the families would seek out help or reach out for consultations would be when they have a teenage son or daughter. There's also a lot of families that we work with that are with the varieties of challenges that are coming from the, as I said, Central Center for Social Works, and they're really, really struggling with so many issues, from poverty to addictions to incarcerations. There's a lot. We are also cooperating with different NGOs who are referring their families to us. So that could be people who are using substance abuses, or maybe people who have been diagnosed with mental illnesses, which is another very important area of our work. LGBT community as well, because sometimes in this society, most of the cases in this society, they are being judged and they are being further marginalized and sometimes punished. Violence in any shape or form. So I would say every human possible challenge that could come to the family.
I have two more questions here. First is regarding the number of sessions in that setting. Like, what do? You see the same family for a year, or for 12 sessions, or for 2?
But it really depends. I mean, there's also this fantastic approach that some of the colleagues from Australia piloted, and it's called one session approach. And it's been invented specifically to assist the families who have been struggling with a kind of reaction to crisis. So they're coming in and they're trying to provide them support, knowing that they will not see them again. So that like treating this session as a first and last, which is also placing, I suppose, a therapist, but a family as well, in a position to think what change is possible within the resources and the scope that they have. And I think that is a really interesting approach. So, and researchers have shown that some families might come to one session, and for them at that particular time, that might be enough. For us, and mostly when we work in the live supervision and the rework supervision, on average, we meet with the families every 2 weeks. And it can range. It can go through 5-6 months to a couple of months. It really depends on the dynamic of the family. Family systemic therapy is not seen as something that should go on for years. It's a very much here and now kind of approach. We do try to understand what has been happening and what kind of influenced some of the ideas that families are holding as their either values or as the ideas or maybe transgenerational ideas that they have that are influencing their decisions today. But because we have 4 to 5 family members in the room, it kind of shortens the period that we work, because we are not working with one person and that person goes back to the house and they are seen as an alien because nobody understands what has been happening to them. So because the change is happening within the family context, it's usually quite beneficial and a bit more to all members.
How do you see influence of the war on your population?
I think this is one of the very important questions, because when the war itself is one of the most devastating experiences that any human being can live, because I think it goes against every single value that we as a human being hold in our life, which is the value or the belief that the world is a good and safe place and that the people are good inherently. So I suppose that the war is shaking those existential beliefs that we have and that are shaping us professionally and personally, and also influencing all of our relationships. I think for most of the people in Bosnia, or in Balkans for that matter, war is something that has influenced and shaped our narratives, that has brought a lot of losses, physical, human, emotional. We've lost a lot of people to war. Some people migrated, some of them are no longer alive. People paths and ideas about life have been influenced and changed. For me, always the question is, how come that we still have wars in the world that we live today, and what it is that recruits men and women into war. Because from our work, we know that people are defined by their values. And most people have really good values about themselves, and they want to be a good husband, or good wife, or good family members, good brothers. I always wonder, how come that so many people can be recruited in this idea that they need to, that the war is the only way to go forward. And unfortunately, when the war in Ukraine started, that had, because it's in European soil, it had such a profound influence on people in Bosnia. A lot of war memories kind of surfaced. A lot of people were deeply shaken by it, and also by the injustice that the war is carrying. And that now the war in Gaza is happening as well. And all this injustice that we are witnessing, and I suppose being unable to change anything and to contribute, is also resonating to our own personal values, which is that we want to believe that the world is a safe and a just place for all, while sometimes we are faced with the fact that it's not. We will be holding a conference next year in Sarajevo, trying to think about the conflicts and the dialogues beyond conflicts. And we are hoping that the space that we can hold for different voices that have been subjected to conflicts and that have been hurt in the process could possibly maybe give us an idea if there's anything to be, if our experience could influence or maybe inspire some other people to think differently, not just about the war, influences of the war, effects of the war, but how come that we are still recruited in this idea of war.
If you would share one tool, belief, or approach that is a must-have for you as a therapist, what would that be?
It would be definitely curiosity. And that in the position that I hold in the space while working with families and couples, I really have no answer for them. That I need to approach them with curiosity and to provide them with the agency to change, or guide them to the agency to change the circumstances of their life.